take the next item. We'll take up our assessment of fair housing and that process, and then we'll turn, and then this is a good setup to our North Texas Regional Assessment for Fair Housing, because that's one of the parts of it. The mic's yours. Sorry, Ms. Brodnick, did you want to say anything? No. Okay. Beverly, thank you for working so hard on this and steering this. Appreciate your work.
Yes. Do you want to say anything? Okay. First of all, I would like to introduce you to our representatives from the University of Texas at Arlington. We have Dr. Miriam Igoof, who was the co-principal investigator on the study, the assessment of fair housing. And we also have Dr. Yvonne Odorak, who was also one of our professors who supervised the project. Dr. Stephen Mattingly, who was the principal investigator, is out of town and could not be here today. But what we will do is I'll give you a brief background on how we got to where we are on the assessment of fair housing. It'll be very brief, and then I'll turn over. The meat of the briefing today will be the presentation from UTA.
So we'll go ahead and do B and C at the same time, and then we'll
Yes.
take questions and comments.
Okay.
Is that all right?
That's fine. Thank you.
you.
So the purpose is to provide an update on the regional assessment of fair housing and to also explain why we now have to also do an analysis of impediments. In terms of overview, HUD issued a new rule in 2015 providing instructions on how we were to affirmatively further fair housing. In doing that, it required an assessment of fair housing, and the purpose of it was to provide for a better planning process in terms of providing access to opportunities and addressing disparities in housing. The process required utilization of HUD data, and it encouraged collaborations with other jurisdictions in the region, which we did. We collaborated with 21 other cities, jurisdictions, housing authorities to develop the assessment of fair housing. And I might mention that since 2016, we have had monthly meetings with 21 other jurisdictions in the region to address these problems on a regional basis. So the next few pages just kind of give you a detail, point by point, of what happened from the time that HUD approved the rule and all the steps we took to make sure that we're in compliance. And if you look at that detail, there were a lot of twists and turns with HUD changing the rules. I'm going to skip on over to page 8 to kind of give you where we are now in recent developments. In January of 2018, HUD issued a notice delaying the development of the AFH until October of 2020. But at that time, they did not provide clear guidance on what the process would be in terms of completing the AFH. And then in May of 2018, they issued a notice eliminating the requirement for the AFH. Keep in mind now, we're already underway with doing this study over several months, meeting with the community, examining all the data that HUD had said that we were required to look at before. And so it was somewhat stunning in May when we were told, okay, you no longer have to do this. What HUD did, if you look on slide 9, they directed that jurisdictions utilize the analysis of impediments as the method to affirmatively further fair housing. And the analysis of impediments is what we used prior to 2015 when the new rule was issued. They said that we could use the data that we had accumulated under the AFH to develop the new AI, and they said they would not accept the AFH from any jurisdiction. So we briefed the Economic Development and Housing Committee in June of 2018 on all of these facts, what was going on with HUD and the direction that we were getting from HUD. And we received approval to move forward with completing the AFH. So where we are now is UTA has completed the AFH, and they have a draft report that is ready for public review and comment. This report will be posted for 45 days to receive public comment, and the information from the AFH will be used to develop the analysis of impediments, which is now required by HUD. We will be bringing forward an item for your approval on the November 28th council agenda to enter into an interlocal agreement with UTA for them to complete the AI at a cost of $72,536. So you may ask the question, what is the point of having the AFH data? How will it be used? On slide 12, we will use the data for planning purposes, as Shan Williams just pointed out, in developing the 5-year consolidated plan, in the equity planning and program development, in the housing policy refinements, economic development and workforce policy initiatives, regional planning efforts, transportation planning, and to address human and social needs. So that concludes my briefing. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Agoof to start the assessment of fair housing.
Thank you, Beverly. And I have a clicker. I want to make sure it works. Thank you very much for having us. Whoops. I am not used to this. Better? All right. So thank you very much for having us this morning. We're delighted to provide you with an update on the North Texas Regional Housing Assessment. My name is Miriam Agoof. I'm one of the co-principal investigators, along with Dr. Otterak. And before we get started, I would like to invite you to visit our website, which is northtexasrha.com. You will find an executive summary, a data summary, and some other important information that pertains to the presentation this morning. So northtexasrha.com. And you will see city council material, things of that nature. If you have an issue finding it, please let me know. So very quickly on the agenda today, I will give a very brief overview of the regulatory context surrounding the assessment, what is the structure, the purpose of the study, and what it means moving forward for the city. So the assessment of fair housing is not just any housing study. It's a fair housing study. It was a requirement set by HUD pursuant to the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. It's a very heavy data-driven exercise that is designed to, again, foster regional collaboration. And Beverly Davis has been leading what we know as being the largest group in the country to conduct the assessment. So 21 entities, which was not an easy task. So I commend Beverly for that. So the structure of the assessment, again, it's a big equity research looking at disparities not only across groups, protected classes, but also geographies. HUD has provided us with a very lengthy list of questions to be answered, and they provided us data to be analyzed to answer those questions. We supplemented the HUD data with our data looking at place-based investment, building new metrics, providing up-to-date data. We also solidified and contextualized the assessment by engaging in very extensive outreach efforts. So we conducted survey, focus groups, consultations, public meetings, again, to make sure that the voice of the community is reflected and captured within that equity assessment. So the mandatory fair housing issues that we had to investigate were the following. So segregation, racial and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, housing needs, disproportionate housing need, access to opportunity, and so forth. And ultimately, this whole big data exercise is an opportunity for us to depict a meaningful and balanced picture of the fair housing landscape in Dallas and the North Texas region, and to derive fair housing goals to address those inequities. So from a practical standpoint, what it means for the city, the intent is for the city of Dallas to be better positioned to affirmatively further fair housing, which means addressing inequity, removing obstacles to access to opportunity, and replace segregated patterns with integrated and balanced living patterns. Very, very importantly, the duty to affirmatively further fair housing is not just a housing problematic. It applies to all activities and programs related to housing and urban development. So that's transportation, parks and recreation, economic development. And again, the information is to be used for the development of the 5-year plan that Shane has just discussed. I'm going to spare reading this very big quote with my French accent, but to make the presentation targeted and concise, I'm going to focus on what is called racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. So that's an overarching issue that had transpired throughout the assessment. Because the duty to affirmatively further fair housing does englobe transforming those areas into areas of opportunity. So very unconventionally, I'm going to start with the findings, then I'll go through the data. As I have explained earlier, we're looking at what's happening in the region, but also what's happening in Dallas. And to be able to understand some of the inequities that the city of Dallas is facing, we have to look at what's happening in the region. So the big findings for the assessment of fair housing for the region are the following. We have found persisting patterns of segregation for the region, fairly severe racial and ethnic inequities along fair housing issues, and growing affordability pressures. Now, as I said, to understand what's happening in Dallas, we have to look at what is happening in the region, and we have found very acute imbalances between the city of Dallas. I'm not doing this right? I got to learn. I got to come back. We have found very acute imbalances between the city and the region. And what it means is non-white households are disproportionately residing in the city of Dallas. Poor households are also disproportionately residing within the city of Dallas. Working poor are disproportionately residing in Dallas. The data also shows or suggests that there's a greater supply of affordable housing, or at least cheaper housing dwelling in Dallas. So some of the fair housing issues that we're going to see at the regional level are very much likely to be seen in the city of Dallas, but a bit more exacerbated because of those imbalances region Dallas. So the key finding for Dallas, and I'll go through the data again because, to be honest, it's a very overwhelming report. It's about close to 400 pages. But the city of Dallas is marked by a very stark geography of inequity. We have found deepening, growing patterns of racial and economic segregation within the city. We have found that non-white household tends to face fair housing challenges at a much greater rate than the counterpart. Obviously, growing affordability pressures, which I think we're all aware of. And we have also documented systemic barriers to access to opportunities, which is a very big impediment to fair housing purposes. So 2 sets of information. On your left, you have a segregation index that shows 2 things. First, that the city of Dallas is more segregated than the region, but also that the level of segregation in the city of Dallas across the years keeps on increasing. Now, an index is great, but you also have to look at where are those segregated neighborhoods. So the map that you see is a regional map of segregation. You have 2 sets of color, red and green. And the methodology is the following. We looked into the extent to which a given census tract or neighborhood differs in racial composition compared to the city. If you have more non-white resident, then it's going to be red. If you have more white resident, it's going to be red. If you have more non-white resident, then you're going to have a shade of green. The darker the green, the more severe the level of segregation. And as I have explained earlier, you will find that those non-white segregated neighborhoods are to be found in the Tarrant County and the Dallas County, with a few pockets in the surrounding counties. So this is how we can move forward and look at patterns of segregation within the city of Dallas. Again, the red areas are neighborhoods with a greater white population share than the jurisdictional average, so than the city average. And the green areas are segregated neighborhoods with a disproportionately greater share of non-white residents. And also I would like to bring to your attention that you have contiguous different shades of green, again, exacerbating the issue of segregation. Extremely important metrics when it comes to fair housing, racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty. So that would be a census tract that has 2 characteristics. The first one is a non-white share of at least 50% and a poverty rate of 40%, which is considered extreme poverty. So what we have done is to map those neighborhoods across time. So from 1990 to 2016, this is the evolutions of racially and economically segregated neighborhoods in Dallas, and they are depicted in pink. As a brief synopsis, and I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. We have first persisting recaps in the southern sector and west side of Dallas. Then we'll also have a spatial dispersion of those recaps across the city. And most importantly, we have a proliferation of those recaps. From 1990 to 2016, the number of recaps in the city has doubled, which is fairly alarming. It's not a pattern that we have seen elsewhere in the region, again, being cognizant of the imbalances that I have mentioned earlier. Also, very importantly, one of the criteria to be a recap is to have a non-white population share of 50%. For the city of Dallas, we are looking at 90% non-white for those recaps. So we are past the concentration of non-white residents. We're looking at the segregation of non-white residents compounded with the concentration of extreme poverty. And also the poverty rates are way above the 40% threshold. We're looking at 50, 60, even 70% poverty rate. How do we go from a non-recap to a recap? Most of the time it is a result of an increase in poverty as opposed to a change in races in the neighborhood. Now we're going to talk about just merging different fair housing issues to again give us a more balanced picture of the fair housing landscape in Dallas. Two maps on your left, the recap map that we just talked about with those pink areas. On your right, the segregation maps. The dots represent the housing choice vouchers families within the city of Dallas, which is about 10,531 families based on our data collection. And so what we have found is that housing choice vouchers families disproportionately reside in a recap in those extremely segregated neighborhoods. The average of housing choice vouchers family in those recaps is about 85 as opposed to 22 in a non-recap. And just for the numbers, because I like numbers, 503 is the number of housing choice vouchers families found in one single recap. And also, as it pertains to patterns of segregation, we have found that housing choice vouchers families tend to reside in the most segregated neighborhood in Dallas, which, from a regional perspective, are the most segregated neighborhoods in the region. So as I explained earlier, we have spent quite a bit of time talking to the community. And one issue that arises invariably at every single meeting is source of income discrimination. So we worked very hard to acquire some data. Inclusive Communities Project has conducted a survey of landlords to gauge the participation rates of those landlords in the housing choice voucher program. So we used the raw data of those landlords and we mapped it against our map of segregation. And what we have found is that the surveyed landlords refusing vouchers tend to be located in those red areas, so in those white concentrated neighborhoods. On the other side, going all the way to the right, the map shows the patterns of housing choice vouchers families in Dallas. And you would see that it is almost a mirror picture, as you would suggest or intuitively think. Housing choice vouchers families are not found where landlords tend to refuse vouchers. And just playing with numbers again, 91% of the landlords surveyed that refused vouchers are outside those recaps. If each of those landlords would house 3 to 4 families, we would not have a single housing choice voucher family in a recap. And we are only talking about, truthfully, a subsample, right? There's probably some other landlords that have not been surveyed. So we've talked about the issue of segregation of both racial and economic lines. There are some compounding issues that come along with those recaps. The one of low access to food and transportation. So in green, those are areas that we called LILA, so low-income, low-access tracts, which again are characterized by an extreme poverty rates and low access to healthy foods and vehicle availability. The labels that you see are just a number of vouchers on the left, and the dots on the right are your light tax. But again, just to highlight the fact that it is very likely that if you reside in a recap, which is an area to be turned into an area of opportunity, you will be facing compounding issues, the one of accessibility to grocery stores and transportation. Now, a transportation study that myself, Dr. Otterach, and Dr. Mattingly have conducted looked at transportation affordability from a different perspective than what we know of. Put simply, we looked into the extent to which housing choice vouchers families, which are somewhat reflective to your population at 30 to 50% AMI, are able to afford transportation. So we took their income and took off the price of healthcare, childcare, what do we pay for again? Housing, all of those great things. And the residual income was translated into transportation costs, either private or public transportation. And what we have found is that an overwhelming majority of housing trust vouchers families are unable to afford private transportation and public transportation. So again, highlighting some of the compounding issues that are tied to location, but also just the very characteristics of the household that are living in those areas. This is a map that shows the number of jobs accessible within a 30-minute transit. The jobs are the jobs that would give you about $300,000, that's a lot, $3,000 a month. So the darker the shade, the less number of jobs, and then the brighter, more jobs accessible. Of course, the big picture is we have a greater accessibility in Dallas than what we would find in our counterpart cities of Fort Worth and surrounding cities. But looking at the patterns within the city of Dallas, we can see that jobs are not equally accessible in the cities. And you will find that the darker shades, again, the lower number of jobs, does correlate with those patterns of segregation in recaps that I have identified earlier. And again, this is just accessibility to jobs. We're not talking about the affordability that I just discussed earlier. Something that you're probably very familiar with is affordability pressure. Those numbers come from a study conducted by the National Low-Income Housing Coalition that looked into what is affordable to a person earning minimum wage. Well, if you are working 40 hours a week and making $7.25, you can afford $377 a month as rent. If you are working minimum wage, you would need 86 hours to be able to afford a modest one-bedroom in Texas in Dallas County. Rent keeps on going up, and we're not building a whole lot of affordable housing. So this is just the market conditions. Affordability pressures. So I think, it is an equity research, so we have to look at where are some of the disparities and start prioritizing the population we'd like to serve and make those tough decisions. What the numbers have shown is that renters tend to be cost burden at a higher rate than homeowners. And of course, households at the lower end of the income spectrum tend to also be more cost burden than their counterparts. So location matters, right? We've talked about this. Affirmatively furthering fair housing say that you have to overcome patterns of segregation, transform those recaps, and those are spatial indicators. So what we have done is just a glance preliminary look. It's to look at whether or not the targeted area for revitalization purposes correlated with or aligned with recaps. And what we have found for the neighborhoods.
You want to mention that that slide changed?
Oh yeah, so this slide has changed, by the way. So you must have the correct version in front of you, but. So again, we looked into whether or not those designated areas were aligned with the recaps. And what we have found is actually very little overlap. Although we are targeting non-white concentrated neighborhoods, the poverty rates of those areas designated for revitalization purposes is significantly lower than what you would find in a recap. So I know that the city has undertaken a series of initiatives to bring more data and start a new wave of investment. So for the market value analysis, what we have done is to, again, overlap those recaps with the MVA. And we found that, of course, recaps are characterized by distressed and middle real estate markets. And so similarly, we looked into whether those focused areas were aligned with recaps. So a big takeaway is we're doing better than the Neighborhood Plus plan if I just had to look at those two criteria alone. However, we're still not targeting those recaps that have been plagued with intergenerational poverty and extreme level of racial segregation. And just to give you a different visual of that problematic or the question that may arise from those maps, on the very left you have the current recaps in the city. The label, the number represent whether or not the recap has been here for a long time, put simply. So if it's a 6 or a 5, it means that out of the following years, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2013, 2015, and 2016, that census tract was a recap 5 times or 6 times or 3 times, right? And so you would see that the recaps that are not overlapping with some of those focus areas have been recaps for multiple generations. And again, if you dig a little bit more into what are some of the very characteristics of those areas, we have discussed it. We're looking at extreme level of poverty, a lack of transportation, just compounding barriers again. I'm going to try to move fast. So, of course, another facet of the study was to look into opportunities. So we have done two things. The first one is to map those different indices provided by HUD. And the second one is to look into the propensity of certain groups to locate in different census tracts, either performing well with respect to the indices or performing not so well. So the map that you see here is actually our labor market engagement map, which looks just like the MVA, just like the segregation map, just like any map that you could literally put together because of, again, that very stark geography of segregation. When we look at the table, the distribution of different populations across census tract performing well or not so well, you would find that vulnerable populations, so limited English proficiency, foreign-born, individuals with disability, non-white households, family with children, tend to reside in census tracts that are underperforming their white counterparts. And also, the census tract within the city of Dallas tend to be outperformed by the rest of the region. It is true for about all the indices that we have used except transportation. Two indices, transit and private transportation. So again, just to encapsulate everything that I have said, the key finding is that the city of Dallas is marked by a very stark geography of inequity and inequities across different groups as well. We have systemic barriers that the state has a lot to do with, and also just maybe the way we are operating as a region. I know that the city has adopted a housing policy, which is a critical step taken towards using data and making sure that we are furthering our commitment to provide affordable housing and to bridge inequities in the city. And I understand as well that the Office of Equity and Human Rights was put together so to institutionalize equity within the city and to make sure that now this is at the forefront of the agenda. So as a result, and as a heads up as well, this research has been very heavy data-driven. The format of the research, however, is very light when it comes to the goals and recommendations to be derived from the data analysis. So what we have done is to provide fair housing goals as it was required. Strategies, funding decision, and so forth belong in a 5-year plan, but we do hope that the goals we have put together would allow the city to make those decisions. So I'm going to keep moving very quickly. We have presented the data to the communities, and what they have done is to prioritize the fair housing issues and contributing factors for us to gauge whether or not the fair housing goals are making sense. And so the final fair housing goals that we have put together for the purpose of affirmatively furthering fair housing are the following. Increase access to affordable housing in higher opportunity areas, prevent the loss of existing affordable housing stock, and increase the supply of new affordable housing, especially in higher opportunity area. Increase supply of accessible affordable housing for persons with disabilities. Make investment in targeted and segregated neighborhoods to increase opportunity while protecting residents from displacement. Increase the support and services for residents of publicly supported housing and maintain and improve the quality and management of publicly supported housing. Finally, increase access to information and resources on fair and affordable housing. And as I have explained earlier in the presentation, there's a few summaries on our website, and one of those contain some more details about the goals and the strategies that we are recommending the city to take into consideration. I hope I didn't take too long.
Doctor, that was great. You covered a lot of stuff in a very short amount of time.
Thank you.
But very understandable. Thank you for your work. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the report. I thought you looked familiar when you mentioned that about the transportation. I remember as a result of the work on the resilience project, you briefed, I think, maybe our committee, Human Social Needs Committee, about that. And so we thank you for your work. First, page 20.
Do I do it? Am I doing it or you're doing it? I do it. All right.
Yeah, I want to make an important point on this particular slide. If you look at Redbird, we see that the average poverty rate is 28%, which is rather low, but the non-white concentration is 94%. And the point I want to make is just because an area is segregated, we shouldn't assume that those are areas of high poverty. There are areas in which over a number of years individuals chose to live amongst others, live amongst people of the same ethnicity, but not because they were forced to. And so we don't want to assume that just because that's the case, or it's a non-white area, it's an area of high poverty. That's a perception that too long has been floating out there. So I wanted to mention that point. Second, one of the biggest challenges to less segregated areas, which is our goal, less segregated areas of poverty, is NIMBYism, not in my backyardism. And until we can address that, I think we're going to continue. And not saying that Dallas or the region of Dallas is the only place. All across the country, we have the same issue. We talk about high opportunity areas. Individuals in certain neighborhoods don't want certain people in their neighborhood. And so until we can address that, I don't know if it can be addressed systematically. I don't know if there are other cities in your research where you saw. Well, let me ask that. You and Dr. Is it Adriac? Okay. In your studies and your work, have you seen other cities that have been able to effectively address this concern of NIMBYism or lack of willingness to move into high opportunity areas?
Yes, there are a few number of best practices to be implemented. One of them is to aggressively disseminate the role of fair housing and affordable housing. I think there is a lot of stereotypes floating around. Just for the anecdotes, I think I have conducted about 60 meetings over the past year and a half in the city of Dallas. In quite a bit of time, I had residents explaining to me that affordable housing is not a problem and that people should get out of poverty themselves and that it's a mindset and affordable housing brings crime. Property value goes down. So there's a lot of bad feelings around publicly supported housing and affordable housing, and I think that maybe the city can aggressively engage in educating the general public. I do think also that policy have a great role in terms of where do we stand as a society. My personal opinion, not the one of UTA, I think that source of income discrimination is an invitation for NIMBYism.
I don't know if you were finished or not.
Oh, yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
My tone is weird.
No problem at all. And many of us, I don't know if all of us were given a copy of it or just those who are on the Economic and Housing Committee. There's a book, The Color of Law. Several of us were given a copy by the president of Inclusive Communities Project, and the author was here, I believe, last week in town. That book does a great job of talking about how systematically policies have been put in place that led to segregation and segregated areas. And so how we can, through my good friend and our director, Beverly Davis, and our Office of Equity, we want to do our part to work against some of those things. The next question, really my last question, is if effectively utilized, some of the tools that you saw, I'm glad we did the HUD consolidated presentation and you were here to hear that. If these tools are effectively utilized, do you see, in your opinion, our ability to address the segregation of poverty in Dallas?
I think that with political will and the right tools in place, absolutely, progress can be made. Based on the research that we have conducted, there is a stark geography of inequity, right? So I think that the city is in the business of making locational decision, and when we do so, if we want to address patterns of poverty and segregation, we have to be very intentional and very strategic in making those locational decisions. So absolutely.
And you made a statement as one of the suggestions, along with the tools. You talked about political will, and I don't want to make an assumption everybody understands what you meant. I understand it's your opinion. Tell us, what do you mean when you say the political will?
Sure. I think that decisions have to be made in light of competing interests, and if a consensus is built and there is a will to move forward towards those goals to address segregation and poverty, then absolutely this will be done. This can be done.
Right. And I don't want to assume that, within a, 4 8 year time period, which is the max of our terms, that we'll be able to address something or solve something that's been decades. But I think we're in a position to where we can lay a foundation to where over the years, if we move forward in this direction, then we'll begin to see a change. My last question is, are there anything other than some of the tools that you saw that you recommend that we utilize that's not here to help us to address this issue of segregation?
Sure. Something that I have seen very valuable is the level of regional collaboration.
Say it again.
The level of regional collaboration. I think that I would invite the city to continue to collaborate with housing authorities across the regions, but also other cities to start finding solutions together, and also collaborate with metropolitan planning organizations and City COG to make sure that we have a comprehensive and collaborative approach to those imbalances that I have described.
Excellent. It led me to one last question, and this is for Beverly.
Okay.
And you're convening. I still got 56 seconds. And you're convening in the conversation you've been having. Do you see that there's a not just an interest, but a willingness amongst other municipalities to address this issue from a regional standpoint?
Yes, Councilman Thomas. We have worked with neighboring counties and cities in Denton County, in Collin County, and in Tarrant County. And one of the things that happened in having this collaboration is that we were able to review data. And when you confront the data, it brings to you a stark reality of the way things are. One of the things that we didn't dwell on is when you look at the vouchers, when Miriam was talking about the census tracts that had the vouchers, a lot of those vouchers are issued by housing authorities from other cities in other jurisdictions. So they're able to do that. I think we had one census tract where we had about 14 different housing authorities who had people living in southern Dallas in one census tract. And so there is a recognition that it is a problem, and we have seen some of the housing authorities in cities in both Denton and Collin and Tarrant County take some what I consider to be bold measures to try to provide additional affordable housing.
Thank you. And I'm going to reach out to you over the next couple of days. This Saturday at the National League of Cities in L.A., I'll be sitting on a panel Saturday morning entitled Redlining and Governing for Racial Equity. And so any input or any insight that you can share with me before I get on the plane tomorrow will be helpful. If you could just email me any information, because this is something that's critical, not just affecting us in Dallas, but all across the country. We need to do something on our watch. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Atkins.
Thank you. Go to page 11. I'm just kind of curious, I look at 1990 and to 2016. And I also look at 1974 to 1990. And there had been a big trend. And why do you pick 1990 to 2016?
Because this was the starting date given to us by
That's the starting gave it to them. Okay. The reason why look at this matter, kind of bring me back in 74, in the 70s, look at Kimball High School, Carter High School, South Oak Cliff, Roosevelt, and you look at the Redbird neighborhood. It's a big change. And you look at what happened. And did you look at schools?
We did.
Okay, I didn't see anything about schools because the transition of those schools changed. Because Carter was all white, South Oak Cliff, on and on, then everybody moved. Then you also look at, and I understand the region, we're looking at the region, but I got to focus on the city.
Absolutely.
That's who I represent, the city. And look at District 8 or the southern part of the city, most of the African American upper middle class moved south to the suburb. So now you're talking about the region in the suburb, which is less poverty, and where they move out, you have more poverty in that area. Then now we look at the economic opportunity, transportation. We do not have adequate transportation to get people to work going east and west. So you did put transportation on there. That's on page 16 in the scale, you know. And until we kind of fix DART and say how do people get to their jobs, you still going to have poverty, because right now we have jobs in the inland port and they cannot even get to work. So they're creating poverty with transportation. And I did look at, you said maybe $3,033 on page 17, the monthly income. Just imagine a person who have a car, transportation, $500 car note, insurance, and buy gas. They are spending 30% of their income on transportation, so they are in poverty. So the jobs there. So we're not in the southern part of Dallas. We don't have that walkable, dense area. And I've been looking at this for over and over and over years. This started almost 50 years ago. So it's getting worse and worse and worse. But our region, outside the south and the north, is getting better, in my opinion. But we are not getting the fruit of the the fruit of the tree inside the city, especially the south. And so I respect all these studies and everything you do. But my main question, what are we going to do about it? We've been knowing this for over decades and decades and decades. But what are we going to do about it? And what tools that we have in the toolbox that we got to do something about it? But the point is that to do that, looking at this council, 14 districts, if you're going to really, really eliminate poverty, is go to page 16. The scale got to be unbalanced. So you got to put more resources, more tools in the poverty area to revalidate that area. But we got to study, but how do we balance to bring people out of poverty? So that's the question too. How do we do it? You know, we got to study. It costs money. Number one, it's a budget. Let's be real. But how do we bring people out of poverty? And that's been the story over and over again. We studied, and these studies have been on the bookshelf years and years and out. But how do we bring it out? How do we do it? That's my question.
Sure. You want to, yeah.
Councilmember Atkins, you have raised a very important question, and it is a very difficult challenge. And one of the ways that we want to start to look at things with the establishment of our Office of Equity and Human Rights is to start to view our budgeting and our planning process applying an equity lens to how we make decisions and in determining how we allocate our resources. And so I think that it will be a beginning in terms of how we view, how we do the budgeting and planning process. And I think also with the collective will of staff and council working together, and also with our partnerships in the community, both nonprofits and businesses, I think that we can make a difference when we're all pulling in the same direction to try to affect change throughout our communities.
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Clayton. I thought you had another question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Davis, Mr. Thomas had asked you a question about coming out of this, what other municipalities are doing. What's one concrete example of something that's come out of this that they're doing tangibly? For example, taking vouchers where they weren't taking vouchers before. What's a municipality that's doing that?
I can think of a couple of examples. In terms of vouchers, I can't think of an example, but I know, for instance, the McKinney Housing Authority has built some additional affordable housing, and they've partnered with some developers in McKinney to build. Also in Frisco. Now, granted, there was some pressure that they were getting from advocates, to do it.
That's a big shocker.
But also, I would say Fort Worth Housing Solutions, one of the things they've done is to go out and purchase, say, an apartment building and that they own, and then add affordable housing in the mix. Keep it mostly, market, but then add that component.
Sure. So basically, not a lot. It's the real answer. Will you go to slide 27, please? And thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So, are those the goals for us as a city or the goals for the region?
Both.
Huh. Okay.
And also the goals apply to not only cities, but also housing authorities in the counties that we worked with.
Gotcha. One, the mayor kind of taught me that numbers don't lie and that more data is better than no data. I will say this is one of these briefings, it's no offense to anybody at the table, that's such a colossal nothing burger that it's really, really frustrating. I know Mr. Atkins asked a question about, well, what are we going to do and this and that? And the reality of it is, we ain't doing nothing, guys. I mean, when I was doing the Poverty Task Force, one of the biggest things that I found out, and it was a really harsh statement to ask. I said flippantly when we were doing the drivers of poverty and trying to vet it to come up with solutions, I asked a guy who was really prominent in housing, I said, well, what are we going to do to cure poverty? He said, nothing. You're going to dilute it. That's what this is. The reality of it is we have two things that we can do to affect poverty in this city. Number one, either we don't do affordable housing, we push it to the suburbs, which we don't want to do because it's a moral issue, or two, we come up with incentives that push people to take vouchers in the northern sector. What can we do based on peer cities around the country or otherwise? So right now, the state of Texas, in their infinite wisdom of loving people, say that we can't make somebody take a voucher, right? Mm-hmm. What can we do as a city to say, okay, apartment complex in my district, we need every apartment complex to take 4 vouchers, right? That should be our bumper sticker. Let's not do this 10% and all this stuff. Everybody take 4. It's not going to kill you. You got 300 units. So we say you're going to take 4. What can we do, for example? So I'm apartment, and I don't want to mess with HUD, and I don't want to take a voucher, but we do a one-stop shop where we fill out your paperwork. Or we say, if you do this, we're going to lower your water bill by a 1/4 point. What, if anything, can we do as a city, or being done best practices that in a marketplace incentive gives a person who owns an apartment complex the reason to take 4 families? Because that's coming out of this. What Fort Worth does ain't going to affect us because people ain't moving from the Grove down to Fort Worth. So what can we do to give people an opportunity to move from an area that's in trouble, for lack of a better way of saying it, to an area of opportunity?
I think that you pointed out some things that have been done in the past, like providing incentives for people to take vouchers. And during the Walker consent decree that was done, incentives were provided for landlords to take tenants in high opportunity areas. And I think also utilizing some type of navigator or an approach where we provide assistance to people who are trying to locate affordable housing, and then also providing the services where the city or some other entity serves as an intermediary in order to guarantee payment on time and provide the types of guarantees that the landlords are concerned about. Providing that role of serving as an intermediary. Those are some of the things that have been done that make accepting the vouchers more palatable to some landlords. And as I said before, I think that with the collective will to do something, that we can make progress. Educating the landlords, having the business community take more of a role in helping people to understand what's at stake, and that if we continue on the track that we are in allowing the number of recaps and levels of poverty to develop, that it just doesn't affect those people that are living in poverty. it affects the overall health of our whole community.
I would just say I think it's a lovely goal, but I think it's patently unrealistic. The reality of it is people don't care. If it does not affect them and if it's in their neighborhood, they don't care. And they never will until what is a motivator to them is the capacity to help their own bottom line. And it's no different than on this council. We all, including me, have had that mental struggle of, man, I really want to do the right thing, but golly, man, my people are going to thump my head for it. That is reality. I mean, I think, I really believe, and Mayor, I know you're on the way out, and so, and I know you, sorry, that sounded awful. You're a lovely human being. No, but I mean, I think from a mayoral perspective, right, as we do city leadership, and from a council perspective as well, I think coming out of this, and it's not something I thought of before reading this, is we have got to go to our apartment complexes, and we really, at a senior leadership to senior leadership standpoint, say, look, ultimately, I don't need you to take 20 folks. And again, we paint people like they're lepers. And it's not. Maybe it's somebody who's working in a restaurant that makes $25,000 a year and serves dinner. I mean, it's everybody always tries to target it as something that's not. And I just think if we do nothing else coming out of this deal, don't worry about Irving we need to worry about that, but they're not going to solve our problem. We can affect what we can affect, and what we can affect is what's on slide 14, where it shows us where we're already discriminating against, but yet every zoning case, every rite of passage to City Hall comes through the north, and if we just do nothing else other than get those folks to take 4, and we do a campaign that with the market-based incentive that gives you 4, I think we can move the needle. And so, anyway, I've gone on too long, but that's what I think we should do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Kleiman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you all very much for this presentation. It is fascinating to me, and as Mr. Clayton pointed out, it just reiterates in some ways the obvious. But it does have some goals in there that we're trying to do. I want to ask a little bit about the regional nature of the study and in my opinion, the regional lack of support that we're getting from anyone besides Fort Worth. I think Fort Worth is kind of addressing this problem the same way we are, and like it or not, the more we try to address it, it seems like the more we attract people that have needs. So we have 2 important organizations in the region. One is the COG, and one is, of course, the MPO, which is part of the COG. Will y'all be addressing those organizations? Because I sit on both those boards and have not heard from you.
Sure. So we actually have invited COG staff to attend some of the meetings. We tried to get them on board to participate in the study. We haven't been able to do so. They are aware of some of the barriers. Our goal, I know, at UTA is to broker that relationship as researchers, to make sure that COG understand their prerogatives and how they can contribute positively to addressing some of the issues.
So, I mean, Beverly knows how to reach me. If I can be helpful, I'm on the COG executive board. I think a combination of our MVA, which I've asked our staff to go on a road show with the MVA, of which I don't think they have, but COG is a good stopping place, and this study, in maybe a few less slides, would be helpful for them to get perspective. As you identified, the 4 counties of Dallas, Tarrant, Collin, and Denton have probably 80% of the population in all of North Texas. Denton and Collin are rapidly approaching 1 million people, and continuing to allow concentration of poverty in Dallas County and kind of assume in Tarrant County is just really not acceptable, and we have to do this as a full community. There was a map that I think you showed, wasn't in my slides, that actually showed the region.
Sure.
And I think it's really important to emphasize that, come back one of the red map. There you go. So it really just shows where, why this is so focused on Dallas. But the reality of it is if we don't get help from our communities around us, then we're not going to help solve this problem. Again, to Mr. Clayton's point, money talks and BS walks. The big chunk of money that comes regionally here is transportation money to the RTC, and maybe we ought to be pressing the COG, who is the executive over the RTC, as well as the RTC, to start including in their decisions with regards to transportation funding is how much are people supporting the regional effort for affordable housing. And I'd be very happy to help on that as well. So let's see if we can figure out how to connect those two disparate dots, because in reality you have the slide that shows transportation is a key driver of poverty, or the lack of.
Oh, it is. It has been shown that transportation is one of the biggest indicators to upward mobility,
Right.
and this is a missing piece in the affordable housing
So
discourse.
we have leverage. The city has 6 appointees and 4 appointees like DART and DFW and stuff like that where we put people on. And Tarrant has the city of Fort Worth has 5 or 6 appointees and several they control. I mean, between these 2 cities, we can actually drive that policy if we get on board with it and almost force the hand of our other counties in the area to pick up some of the pieces on this and not burden the major metropolitan areas with the entire affordable housing and poverty issue. So I would like to work with you on that if I can. I have colleagues in Fort Worth who I believe I can reach out to as well, and we can help drive that message. On a more micro level, can we look at page 13? And that's the page where we are looking at, this slide, that shows the recap areas and the housing choice vouchers and how there's just such a major overlap of that. So who issues these vouchers?
Primarily DHA, the Dallas Housing Authority, and the Dallas County.
Right. And how many properties does DHA own in these recap areas?
Oh my God. I have it in a report, just not in my head.
A fair number, a lot, a little, of the properties that take vouchers?
Compared to private market?
Yes.
A few.
Yeah, more than a few. And more than a few that are in non-code compliant with the city. And more than a few and there are a handful, I believe, that we may actually have had the community prosecutor involved in. So my point is, DHA actually has an incentive to concentrate poverty in these recap areas. Would you agree with that?
Not entirely.
Okay, why not? They own properties and they give vouchers.
Well, DHA covers 7 counties, so I think the structure is conducive for.
So if DHA covers 7 counties, why do they have such a concentration here?
If I can interject, when
Sure.
we talk about the 7-county coverage, what that means is if they issue a voucher, that person can go anywhere in those 7 counties to utilize the voucher. A lot of our public housing, especially, was built in areas that were traditionally blighted areas. And over time, what happened was, and that was the way the original federal law was written, that you would build public housing in blighted areas, in low-income areas. So a lot of our public housing historically was built in those high-poverty areas, and just over time has remained in those areas.
So the public housing policy the fault doesn't completely lie with the city of Dallas. I mean, DHA has really misserved us here and created this concentrations of poverty that we have by just doing just that, putting housing in blighted areas.
And that was, as I pointed out in the briefing yesterday, when we talked about some of the things that were historically done by the federal government. One of the things was the decision of where to build public housing. It wasn't just the local housing authorities. It was basically dictated by the federal government as to where public housing would go.
And now they're dictating that we fix their problem.
Yes.
The problem that,
Yes.
let's just say, they contributed to.
Yes, exactly.
That is a high level of frustration in that. I understand Mr. Thomas' concerns of NIMBYism, but, my folks in North Dallas understand the need for affordability, and they also understand the need for mixed income. I think that is such a better message. Am I out of time? I'm sorry. So enough rating on DHA, more to come.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan.
Yeah, thank you very much for the mayor, and thank you, ladies, for the study. Very, very intuitive, and of course, I'm not surprised by any of it, having been there many, many years. But we're going to have to build, shared sacrifice. As I've said before, we have 14 council districts, and we've just got to focus on not concentration, but dispersion and redistribution. And I'm not going to call out any organization as being the boogeyman. We're all guilty of that, limited resources, and sometimes it's just easier to check a box. But rather than patching and repairing, pasting, and doing whatever with LIHTC projects, that's easy to do. It's low-hanging fruit. Yeah, we can turn those around in a heartbeat, give people a place to live, but it doesn't solve our overarching problem. So if you look at the slide on 13 and 17, it just tells the picture. We're looking at 13 now. If you'll just move to 17, it is just so stark. If you'll just focus on Southeast, where I'm at and what I represent, it's a sledgehammer, really, when you see that, the effect of that. And so I guess if the goal was to keep our citizens in Southeast Dallas and Southern Dallas, segregated and away from jobs and limited transportation options, then we've been real successful. I moved there 33 years ago, and it was an entirely different footprint. It's all shifted, so it's just simply we've just been boxed out, and put into a corner, really. And the only way we're going to come out of this is we're going to have to bring jobs into Southeast Dallas, but we also have got to be able to get our folks out of Southeast Dallas on a freeway or a roadway somehow to get to where the jobs are. And that's the reason for my bitter disappointment on the Trinity Parkway. Call it whatever you want, but it was intended always to be a bypass road to get my folks out of this area around downtown. They don't need to go downtown, okay? If they're working downtown, that's lovely. Got plenty of roads and freeways to go to downtown. But candidly, the jobs are in the northwestern part of the city. We've got the medical area. We've got the design district. We have Lovefield, DFW, Upper Stemmons Corridor, mid-cities. And I can't get my folks there. There's no way. Public transportation does not go but to 20% of the jobs. I recognize we need more jobs in Southeast, but we only have so much acreage for business parks. Most of the land that we've got is already built out in District 5. There's a little bit of construction that could occur on the C.F. Hahn Freeway. We could, I think, reconfigure that land and rezone it perhaps into a comprehensive package, so we'll have industrial manufacturing, industrial research, and so forth. But what we need is ready-to-build lots so we can move in and construct buildings. We need high-speed internet, that kind of infrastructure that allows for plug and play. Because jobs, they just turn their nose at us. They go to DFW Airport and Lovefield because that's where the infrastructure is for the plug-and-play type buildings. We don't have that ready-made. We have to wait on that, but we have to replat and reorganize, and there's a ton of things that goes on with tree ordinance, I-SWIM, replatting, and just it's a huge challenge. The land prices are reasonable, but we don't have any organized way to get that done. I think we've done a good job in the inland port area of putting and all that land together to create jobs, but we're going to have to do more of that in southeastern Dallas, not just in deep southern Dallas. So I think the mayor's done a great job of bringing attention to Grow South. That's great. We need to now begin to not only grow south, but grow southeast. My program that we've had at Pleasant Grove now, I think it certainly does that. But we have got to create a bypass road to be able to get those folks to those jobs and those areas that I've talked about before. But I think we're all waiting in our part of town to embrace, development and commercial industrial zoning. But the land use patterns, as I mentioned again, that's going to be a big thing. And we're, they say all the time, we're too big to fail. Well, we are. We're way too big to fail, Dallas, and we need to do better. And we need to be successful, and the future growth and well-being of our city really depends on it. President Kennedy mentioned in 1961, he said, we choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. We all recognize that poverty is exceptionally hard, but we owe it to the citizens that we represent to dig in. And, Mayor, we need a moonshot attitude towards trying to solve this problem in southern Dallas. And I know you've spent a great deal of your 8 years trying to do that. But let's put our shoulder to the wheel and try to once and for all solve this crisis. And thank you all for your contribution.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gates.
Thank you, Mayor. I had a question. When you, I think it's the slide with the showing where the vouchers reside in Dallas. So, how many vouchers is that representative of?
10,531 vouchers.
Yeah. 10,000. And I think we made some good. I think Mr. Clayton made a really good point. You know, if that's 4, but that's not even. We can't change a needle with 10,000 homes when we have how many people living in poverty in Dallas?
Too many.
Yeah. What percentage of Dallas live? I couldn't find that.
Well,
I mean,
it's
I thought it was
30% of children living in poverty.
Right. That
Okay.
live under the where.
I
So.
don't have that number.
But 10,000 is 0.007 of our population. Mm-hmm. So where we may be having some strategies related to trying to disperse the vouchers, it's still, I don't see how that's going to even be impactful.
I have a suggestion.
Okay, I want to hear.
You know, I think that families in the housing choice voucher programs are not meant to stay forever in that program. So I think unlocking neighborhoods opportunity have the potential to have those families to achieve self-sufficiency and to graduate. Because we're talking about housing choice vouchers families, but we have to also think about those who qualify for vouchers and don't have a voucher. Those are your 30% AMI, 50% AMI,
Right.
and 80% AMI. So hopefully the housing choice vouchers program, if it functions as intended, which is to access higher areas of opportunity, would have the potential to be a vehicle for self-sufficiency for other families that are living in your recaps, right? So it's not just an end to move people.
So do we know how long then the average person is on a voucher?
I mean,
or dependent on a voucher?
I mean, it depends on the housing authority. It depends on market conditions and policies. It depends on.
That's a really, really good point. If we could have that true turnover, and you're not affecting just 10,000 people over and over and over, but you're multiplying that. We might be able to figure out ways to make that happen. I think, Beverly's talked about if there was, units that were controlled throughout the city that then we knew they didn't have to go through all the rigmarole of, following HUD, but we could have the vouchers. But I think you also bring to a point, I think it's on page, the one that with the goals at the very, very end. Well, let's go to page 11 first. So on page 11, I mean, this is pretty shocking. I mean, I don't think anything actually is that shocking, and I think we all know this. We've heard this in multiple briefings on poverty, but this is embarrassing to us as representatives. This problem since 1990 to 2016, and we need to own it. It's getting worse. I think the numbers are 18 recap areas down. Now we're up to 36. So policies that the city's had since 1990 to 2016 are not helping, and if anything, it's making the problem worse. And I think we're not going to change our form of governance here. We worked hard to get to 14.1, but when you have 14.1, I think you protect your little area, and you vote for your little area, and you represent what your constituents are telling you, and that I think is showing us that we get to the point where it's hard because there's one person and he's worked hard in the last 7 years to try to make this better, but he's only really one working on it, and it's going to take all of us. But I mean, Mr. Clayton was so spot on, and being honest is we go to our neighborhood meetings and we all want to be neighborhood advocates, and they're afraid of any type of affordability. So it's hard to overcome, and I think this map or this slide actually kind of shows that. And then to the same challenges for those that where we have the concentration of poverty, you want to do everything you can to help your residents. So when we go to the slide about the goals. At the end, that and I think, how do you?
Too many.
Yeah, it's not that one. It's that we're going to make investments in targeted and segregated neighborhoods to increase the opportunity. That's not really changing the fold, and that's where we're fighting for these programs that end up backfiring, because it's the only way to help the stock that's there is to invest, and sometimes those are tax credits. Then it doesn't change. So these are great goals, but I don't see any real tools to get us to be able to achieve them. You start with increased affordability housing. We're talking about, okay, where maybe we can do that with 10,000 vouchers. We're talking about existing affordable housing stock, preventing the loss of that. So that's kind of out of our control. If somebody has the right to build, we see that all over town. We see, as Mr. Kleiman calls it, naturally occurring affordable housing that's not linked to any type of a voucher or deed on the land or anything else, and it gets torn down, and then we put up just new housing, and it's not affordable anymore. So it's just it's a little frustrating. So, but I'm going to leave it at that. My time's up, I think. But I don't see enough really tangible tools on the table that we can move this needle at this point. Mm-hmm. So. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your comments. We do have a.
She can answer.
We do have a handout with strategies that are a bit more tangible and actionable, which is on a website that I have mentioned earlier. There is also a pretty impressive housing policy library that just came out a couple weeks ago from the NYU Furman Center and ABT Associate that gives you close to 100 tools to prevent the loss of affordable housing. So actionable tools. I think what the study offers is, of course, not site-specific recommendation, but a framework of action. I think that those recaps are a major metric that could be implemented across every department in the same way that you could have a recap impact statement. How would that decision affect recaps in that area? So there are ways to go about it, and those are challenging. Those are real challenges. There are tools to overcome poverty and prevent the loss of affordable housing, incentivize the supply of affordable housing. It's just a matter of finding the right one that fits the city.
Thank you. Mr. Griggs.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. How important do you think source of income discrimination would be if we could, that issue?
Very important. So from the study that we conducted that pertains to housing trust vouchers, families, we had a sample of close to 29,000 families, and disproportionately everywhere in the region, they live in the most segregated area. And again, thinking about the housing trust voucher program as a revolving program, helping families to achieve self-sufficiency. We have such a huge population at 30% AMI, 50% AMI that could benefit from that program that are still waiting for some type of assistance. So I think that unlocking neighborhoods opportunity can have the potential to enable our families to achieve urban mobility, and it's going to take a while. I get that, but I think it has the potential to then open the door for other families.
So if there was one policy that would have the biggest impact, is that the one that you think it would be?
For source of income discrimination?
Yes.
It's one of them. It's very hard to give you one policy that would.
Not one. Then which other ones? Have you? 2, 3. So source of income discrimination would be in that top group.
Right.
Which other ones come out to mind?
I'm thinking more in terms of procedure. I think that the right metrics implemented across the board in the city could help us track whether or not we're moving in the right direction. So recaps, I think, has to be a metric to be used all across the city. So, for example, just for the purpose of affirmatively furthering fair housing, you have to transform those recaps. And we have seen that those recaps are doubling over the past couple of decades. So I think that we have to be very intentional in the type of investment we're making to make sure that we're targeting those areas. So it's more about making sure that when we design our programs and make decision that we are targeting the right population in the right location. So again, more of a framework than actual policies.
Okay, so policy-wise, is there any policy that you think is greater or equally important to source of income discrimination? I think you gave us some advice on we can improve things by having metrics in place and a procedure to monitor recaps and intentionally make those as target areas for the various sources of funding.
I think that zoning is, of course, another tool that has a lot to do with the landscape of opportunity of affordable housing. So I think that maybe diving a little bit more and see whether or not zoning can be an impediment to the provision of a wide range of maybe cheaper housing could help.
So what do you think of the investment zoning or the inclusive zoning that's been briefed to the council, making through CPC? Now it's been at council committee. Are you familiar with
the voluntary inclusionary zoning? So I haven't thoroughly studied the housing policy, so I wouldn't be able to give justice to the document, but all I can say is, of course, inclusionary zoning, voluntary, is an important tool to bridge the gap.
So I'm just trying to get the recommendations, concrete things that the council can do. Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing that we really need to take on the source of income discrimination. We should probably make that one of our top items for lobbying down in Austin.
Definitely.
And certainly probably join the lawsuit with Austin and change that law. And then number 2, we need to be tracking these recap areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then making sure that our financial resources are targeting them and monitoring them and bring a plan to decrease them. And then zoning-wise, I know you haven't looked at it, but hopefully then we are, I know you haven't looked at it, hopefully we're on the right track with our investment or inclusive zoning program that's going to give certain density bonuses for additional levels of affordability that developers provide.
And maybe another one that I think is very important is to understand that for HUD, in HUD's lenses, it's not only allowing families to access opportunity-rich neighborhoods, but to also revitalize those areas. And I understand that maybe the fear of further segregating and further concentrated poverty might act as a deterrent to take action, but I would invite the city and other supportive agencies to collaborate to provide the missing infrastructure in those recaps. So often the provision of additional affordable housing in a recap might not be a good solution, depending on the recap, just throwing thing out there. But I think that we have to take into consideration some of those vital infrastructure that might be missing. There's high crime issues, the lack of sidewalks. Again, just the basics have to be there as well. So revitalizing those recaps.
That's a good point, because that's a big premise of our housing policy, as you know, is not all areas of Dallas are ready for housing right now, but we want to get them ready. And to get some areas ready, they need the quality of life issues addressed. They need the infrastructure issues addressed, and the city needs to do that. And then we can get more housing into the areas. So certainly we're aware of that. Okay. Well, great. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you for those items that we can work on as a city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Second round, Mr. Callahan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I recall back in 1992, President Clinton and Vice President Gore, they had this little button that they wore on a lapel, and it said it was very simply, "It's the economy, stupid." I just remember that so clear, and so everyone jumped on that bandwagon. Today, I think we need an update. It's jobs, stupid. Because the economy is booming out there, but unfortunately many of our citizens are glooming and dooming because they're not a part of that new economy. That new normal that was created in, say, 2007, 8, 9, some people just simply have not gotten through that or over that. So it's all about jobs, 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 but it's also about disposable income. It's about economic security and opportunity and well-being. And Mayor, that ought to be our rally cry right there, that disposable income. We can have jobs, but we don't have enough income to sustain ourselves, a living wage, really beyond a living wage. Let's just really be real here for a moment. That is going to be our secret. The other thing in our part of town where I represent, we have a lot of affordable and economic and starter and any term you want to use, VA housing, FHA housing, on and on. They changed the wording around, the nomenclature around. But we need that next step housing, because what's happening to us is we're creating a brain drain, so to speak, of people that are college educated, but they out-migrate because there's just simply not the housing options for growing families. They need 3 and 4 bedroom homes, and so if they don't find those in Southeast Dallas District 5, they're going to go to Mesquite or Rockwall or Forney or somewhere else, Cedar Hill, and those, and that's what's caused this great urban migration outward. It used to be the other way around. Everybody in 1945 and 50 was coming into the inner city, and then all of a sudden we went out. But we have obviously a population increase, but unfortunately that's where the impoverished are maintaining because of limited housing opportunities, limited transportation. Everything's on the limited supply. So if we can solve education and training, certification training, huge, because that might double their income just by having one piece of paper to hang on the wall. Then also getting them the disposable dollars that they can have the right kind of transportation, either through DART or through having their own car. All of those things are real critical that we've got to propound. So if we can do that and increase expansion, disposable income, you're going to have Southern Dallas flower. There'll be restaurants and retail and entertainment options. There'll be better houses and all that. And that's what we've got to get to. And we've got kind of a general infrastructure put in place to do all that, but we have not yet solved the ultimate equation. It's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of money. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anything? I'll just close with a couple of comments and questions. Would you go back to the first map, very beginning? I think one of the questions you have to ask yourself, thank you, whenever you take on a problem is, what does success look like? Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult question here, because I don't think you want to say it should be all red, okay? Because that, as Mr. Thomas says, there's a lot of people choose to live in different places. We also know that workforce is very important in any economy.
Yes.
And I would ask us, as we deal with this issue, we think carefully about the words that we use, because poor people are not bad people. Poor people provide a role in our economy that is important. And to me, this is an asset for the city, not a problem. And we look at this as a problem. Do those poor people want to stay poor forever? No. And it is our job to help them figure out how to do this. But I would argue, okay, that we have a much better workforce than the rest of those folks in those red areas. And that is a mindset that I think we need to start to change around here, all right? Second, I think this map shows that we've got a two-front battle on our hands. First, we have the battle from a regionalism standpoint that Mr. Kleiman spoke about, and then we've got what we can do as a city and the tools that we can deal with. I love, and by the way, our hands are tied by so much, whether it's the legislative, and I love for the legislation to get on board, but that's kind of a pipe dream, okay? And I love Mr. Clayton's attitude about what can we legally do and how can we get it done. Let's take accountability to try to figure this out. And it's with that mindset that I think we need to have a much better actionable plan for the city that I don't think we've got yet. As good as our housing plan is, I think it lacks a little clarity on some of the specific details that we need. Let's go to the first map of the recap. Not that one. That one. Okay? So we don't have somebody around this table, and that's the District 4 representative. Okay? I'll be the District 4 representative. We can all see where those recaps are, right? In District 4. Mr. Brodnick's, I've said this before, but we have to spend an inordinate amount of money in District 4 versus District 5, 7, 8, 9. We've got to do shock and awe on District 4. I mean, I understand we don't need to be building a lot of new housing, but we need to have every code inspector down there. We need to make sure every sidewalk is right. We need to build the infrastructure, and that's a decision that only you guys can make around this council. Because when it becomes budget time, everybody's going to say, I want my piece. But that says it right there. Until we spend money in building infrastructure with our schools in District 4, that isn't going to be better. We can talk about housing all you want, but this is an issue that deals with the same problems when you go talk to citizens down there. All right? Second, I assume, coming back to our consolidated plan, whoever's doing the consolidated plan, that we shouldn't spend any money in the consolidated plan unless it's in one of those recap areas. Let's not be bringing consolidated things. I mean, I'm taking every tool we got, okay, consolidated plan, just like other stuff. And let's focus on these areas of concentrated areas of poverty that we somehow want to kind of deal with. Now, that's going to be a hard one because we got some friends doing some good projects over in this area and that area. That's the way I would look at a chart and say that is a screen for us to do. What is not here are opportunity zones, okay? How do our opportunity zones match up? Because that is a lot of, let's call it, I know there's no such thing as easy money, but there's easier money. And opportunity zones are going to create a huge amount of investment in our city. And do you have a map that shows how those opportunity zones, how do they match up against your recaps? Because the governor did it, we didn't do it.
I have to find it in this 400-page document. But we do have a map that shows recap, opportunity zone, as well as areas that have been flagged as gentrified.
And what was
areas flagged as gentrified. So
flagged as gentrified? Okay, well, I'm just looking at where the money's going to go from a opportunity thing. Is there an overlap there? I don't think it is. I think it's probably going to look sort of like your neighborhood plus areas, if I remember looking at those things. So
right, there is very little overlap with our recaps and those opportunities.
Yeah, so that's a problem. What they do? So you think they do in some areas? All right, that's good, because we need to get these opportunity zone funds going, and we need to have programs in place to be able to do that. I am a big fan of working with the apartment association and doing something like Mr. Clayton talked about, and saying, if you love our city and you want to do what's right to the city, and I would say the greater Dallas area, okay? I would start to take this regional thing on and say, all right, show me a show of hands, anybody that's not going to take 4 vouchers. Let's just talk about that and why we're doing it. This does not answer the almost the existential question we had last week or 2 weeks ago in regards to are we going to spend city money or allow federal money to be spent in decrepit apartments in southern Dallas when kids are growing up in wretched conditions. I know I voted with everybody, and I know why we did that. But we need to be very, very thoughtful about making that decision, because I'm a big believer in the broken glass theory, broken window theory. That if you fix every project, you see it trash on the floor, you do it. Now, I understand we don't have enough money. I understand that we've got great theoreticians to say if you kind of do that, you're never going to go north, okay? I think we can do both at the same time, all right? And so I'm heartbroken when I see those families living in those conditions and being mayor of Dallas. And I would hope that all of us would be, okay? Now, I believe that our lawyers have a big part to do this. So if I want to be Action Jackson, and if there's an issue in apartment buildings that are not up to standard and code, I want every legal action, that's my vote, whether they're single-family homes or they're big apartments, to making sure that they live up to the code that we set. Because there's too many folks that are housing people that really are trying to skirt the system. And we've got a system that, and I think that's much more, that's a greater chance of happening than sometimes trying to figure out what's happening with our state legislature. Lastly, I believe this whole council is aligned around poverty and dealing with it. And I appreciate this conversation because it does take everybody's thoughts on how to deal with this. I think in some ways we've got to realize that poverty is generational. That's the bad news because we can't hit a switch tomorrow, okay, and solve it. On the other hand, it's good news because I think that we can address poverty in 20 years. In one generation, if you start to do the right things by young children and focus on those children living in poverty. Mr. Brodnick and I sit on a group that is addressing this issue, and it comes from the Mayor's Task Force that Mr. Clayton and Ms. Montoya kind of led. And we need, I'm going to be focused on that in the last 7 months while I'm here, to focus on how do we deal with generational poverty. Housing's an issue, okay? But it's not all about housing. There's about 5 or 6 other things that I think this council can do and other organizations can do to address this. So we got to own up to it, as Mr. Clayton said. We've got to kind of be advocating, whether it's in Collin County or Tarrant County or in the state legislature, but we've got to have specific ideas that are bold in this. We've got to approach it in a more creative way than we've ever done before. But I think this conversation's what we needed to have. It's a slap in the face to all of us, and I think we need to get on and make it, address this. So, with that, we'll end this. We will